11:25 is the time. We go to our Smoke on the Water guest lines, and we bring in our good friend Jim Hart. Usually talking Braves baseball. Today we talk Georgia Tech football. Jim, how we doing?
Hey, fantastic, James. Great being on with you and Mark this morning.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and putting you in a little different role here as we previewed Georgia Tech here over the last couple segments and talked about what this team will bring to the table. The biggest discussion has been in the room. Mark not buying Georgia Tech offensively. I love Georgia Tech offensively. I think from a running back, quarterback, offensive line standpoint, they're as good as they have been in a long time, and Paul Johnson said that himself. How do you view Georgia Tech offensively this year? They turned the football over a lot last year, but how do you view them this year?
Offensively, I think they're going to be more powerful than they were last year. They've got a lot more talent in the offensive line, a lot more depth than what they've had. Paul Johnson in his first few years had some problems as far as injuries. He had some guys leave early, and quite frankly, Chan Gailey did not leave the cupboard full on the offensive line, and Coach Johnson and his offensive line staff have done a great job in taking what they had, including some walk-ons like Sean Bedford, who was a 6'1", 260-pound defensive tackle walk-on that they took and turned into an all-ACC caliber player. This team is going to really operate behind this offensive line, and then you've got triggerman Tevin Washington, who's going into his second year as a full-time starter. He's not a real big-time playmaker, but he's a guy who manages the team very well. He's very well-liked. He's a good leader. He doesn't turn over the football. He's a guy that has to distribute the football. But, James, one area that I do disagree with you, I think really at the running backs and at wide receiver, Georgia Tech has taken a step down the last couple of years in the type of big play type of players they have. You don't see Stephen Hill out there on the wing. They've got some talented players, but really there is no returning wide receivers that caught any passes last year. And then at running back, you've got David Sims, the B-back. He's not a Jonathan Dwyer type. He's not an Anthony Allen type. He does have some good skills, but he showed last year that he doesn't have big play type ability either. And then the A-backs, you lost Roddy Jones, who started for Georgia Tech for 4 years. And you return Oren Smith, who's a big playmaker. But I think just talking about those players that aren't in the program anymore, I think that Paul Johnson is really going to have to develop some guys that are able to make the big plays.
Now, as we move forward, is there a quarterback controversy? Because when we talked to Paul Johnson here on this show, he told us it was Tevin Washington's job to lose. Do you feel like that there's any quarterback controversy, or is Tevin the guy right now?
Tevin Washington is without a doubt the guy. I have spoken with people very close to the program. I spoke with the father of one of the backup quarterbacks, and he just point blank told me, I'd love to have my son play, but Tevin Washington is the guy. And everybody on the football team knows it, and that's just the way it is. Tevin Washington is a guy, he's a redshirt senior. He started all last year. He started the last 4 games of the regular season in 2010. He is just the guy, and this is a kind of offense that it really comes down to distributing the football. It's like the point guard on a basketball team. He's so instrumental in getting the ball and making the decisions on the fly. This is not a typical offense where the offensive coordinator is really running the team and making the calls. The quarterback is making the decisions on the fly, whether or not he's going to give it to the B-back, whether or not he's going to keep it himself, or whether or not he's going to pitch. And the guy that's able to do that is the guy in this offense that's going to play quarterback. You've got 2 guys that have more athletic ability than him in St. John Days and redshirt freshman Vad Lee. Vad is the better thrower, and St. John is the better runner than Tevin Washington, but Tevin Washington's a better quarterback. One thing Paul Johnson did say in the media, I don't know if he mentioned it on your show, but there is an opportunity this year that he'll be using Vad Lee and St. John Days situationally, Lee to potentially come in and throw the football on obvious passing downs, St. John Days to come in with particular running packages.
Well, see, that was the next question I was going to ask you about St. John is could we see him? I'm very high on B.J. Bostic. I think he's going to be a guy that can really help Georgia Tech from a running back standpoint. But could we see St. John Days come in and get involved from a running back standpoint here in this offense if he's not going to be able to play quarterback on a consistent basis just to get him out on the field?
He's a very good athlete. He's a kid with a great attitude. He's well put together. He runs well. He's tough. He's the type of guy that you want on the football field. One thing about Georgia Tech, they don't have the athletes that Clemson and Georgia and Miami and a lot of teams have. So what you have to do, you have to find ways to get your best athletes on the football field. St. John Days is definitely one of them. And one other thought along that line, I think there's some other players that Paul Johnson has. He's recruited fairly well the last couple of years in the skill position area, and it'll be interesting to see if he makes the decision to get some guys on the field this season that don't have the experience but have better athleticism than some of the guys that do have the experience. And St. John Days is definitely one of those guys. It'll be interesting to see how and if and when he gets him on the football field this season.
Jim, this is Josh Phillips here. I wanted to ask you about a particular player. I know you mentioned the lack of playmaking ability in that backfield. There's a kid that I've been really high on in this recruiting class, Justin Thomas. I really feel like he can fill that role. What is the word coming out of Georgia Tech? I know he's a freshman, but I know he had committed to Alabama and then changed his mind to come to Georgia Tech. What type of athlete do the people there at Georgia Tech believe he can be for him this year?
Josh, he's a tremendous athlete. He just won the Alabama State Sprint Championship. I forget which classification that is, but he's a guy that is an elite athlete, the type of player that Georgia Tech typically does not get a guy of this caliber. He's somebody that if he's able to come in and run the offense, be able to throw well enough to keep the defense off stride, he's a guy that could potentially be the quarterback in this offense and really take it to the next level, because the level of speed that he has compared to what Tevin Washington has and compared to what Josh Nesbitt had is there's no comparison. He's a guy that's got that extra gear, and if you can put an elite type of runner at the quarterback position that can make decisions, it really would take this offense to another level. Now, as far as going into this season, I find it very doubtful that he's going to be able to come in and learn this offense and being able to earn playing time. A lot of people thought it was going to happen with Vad Lee last year, and now here we are, Vad going into his redshirt freshman season, and it's still a situation where Paul Johnson doesn't feel comfortable that he knows the offense well enough. And it was the same thing with St. John Days last year, and these are two very bright kids that work real hard and have the ability and played similar offenses in high school. They aren't ready to run this offense. Justin Thomas will almost certainly not be able to run this offense this year from the quarterback position. But in my opinion, he may be one of those guys when I talked about getting your athletes on the field. He may be a guy that you want to play special teams, maybe return kicks or punts, maybe put him in at wide receiver in some packages, maybe get him at A-back, maybe put him at quarterback if you're going to call a pure quarterback run. Again, he's a guy that you want on the field because of his athleticism. One thing about Georgia Tech, they have recruited better at the skill positions the last 2 years, so the need to get him on the field probably isn't as high as it's been in prior seasons.
Visiting with Jim Hart, who covers Georgia Tech for GeorgiaTechSportsTalk.com. As we move forward, let's switch over to defense. This defensive secondary as well as this linebacking core ought to be tremendous. There's worry about the defensive line. What do you view from a defensive line standpoint?
I think the defensive line is a real big question mark this season, James. And you look at the nose tackle, T.J. Barnes, 6'7", 335, a redshirt senior. Man, that looks good and sounds good when you read it, doesn't it? I mean, huge size, he's got the experience, but his sophomore and junior year, he was about a 20 to 25 play per game guy. He just didn't have the ability to go out and the athleticism and the stamina to play more than that. Of course, you get into the off season, and as you know, covering Clemson and other schools and at Georgia Tech, guys always look a lot better in the off season. We all get optimistic and think that TJ's all of a sudden going to discover it. But my opinion is that typically a guy, if he doesn't have it by the time he's a redshirt junior, by the time he's a redshirt senior, you aren't going to see a lot more. Now, if he's only able to go 25, 30 plays and you need another 40 plays, where are you going to get it from? The guy that backs him up, Sean Green, 6 foot 285. That's not a typical nose tackle in a 3-4. That's a guy that's very small and a guy that really hasn't played. He hasn't played any football for Georgia Tech. He was redshirted his first year. He broke a leg last year. So you can see a big drop-off in experience and size after T.J. Barnes, and you really need an elite nose tackle, as you know, to key a defense like this. One thing that Georgia Tech has talked about in the spring is they're going to go more to a one-gap system. They had been two-gap under Al Groh, and as you know, two-gap is where basically the nose tackle is going to stand up the guard as well as the defensive end standing up the men opposite them, where a one-gap is more trying to shoot the gap in between the offensive linemen, try to use your quickness, try to disrupt. I think you're going to see that a lot more, James, out of necessity. On the defensive end, you got Euclid Cummings, you'll have Ajan Cross, a 3-year starter. He's a good, solid player. And probably Euclid Cummings, a redshirt junior, 6'4", 280, good size. But this is really, when you look at it, and if you really want to be honest, this is probably an average defensive line at best. And they need to get a lot more pressure on the quarterback to take pressure off those linebackers or defensive backs so they can really do what they do best.
Can Kallon, the 4-star out of Central Gwinnett, can he come in 6'5", 260, nice frame, big kid? Can he come in and contribute, or think they'll redshirt him and try to wait and build him a little more?
Looking at him realistically, he's actually up to about 285 now, 6'5", 285. He was a basketball player. He's a very athletic kid for that size. And I talked to him a few times, and he's just got a great personality. He's originally from England. But in reality, he started playing football spring of last year. He had never stepped foot on a football field before. And now you're putting him into major college football. And when you look at it in that context, unless it's special teams, it's really hard to fathom him going out there and playing a lot of football unless it maybe is situationally on third down. But still, James, as you know, you played offensive line. You go up against a guy who's equally as big, who's been playing the game since he's 7, 8, 10 years old, who's had coaching, and it's really hard to believe that a guy like that doesn't have the technique and doesn't have the experience is really going to be able to go out and be productive. If it happens, if this kid is able to come in as his freshman year, true freshman year, and be productive and being able to make plays, you're looking at a guy that's going to be a monster by the time he's a junior.
As we visit with Jim Hart, who covers Georgia Tech for GTSportsTalk.com, is it fair to say, and at least over the past couple years it's been this way, that Georgia Tech's most important game of the year is their very first one? That doesn't happen often, but that battle with Virginia Tech has been the game that's decided the team to represent that side of the ACC in the ACC championship game. Is it fair to say that again, that they better start out 1-0 if they plan on trying to play for an ACC championship?
Well, James, as we know, Virginia Tech does not make a habit of losing a lot of football games. And if you lose to them right out of the gate, then you're going to have to beat them by a game because you lose the tiebreaker. So it's an absolutely huge football game going up against Virginia Tech. And you're going to have to go up there on the road. You're playing that ESPN night game that has been tough for all teams to win in the ACC on the road. So it's a tough spot. It's a huge football game. Personally, I love it because Georgia Tech has been playing teams like Jacksonville State, South Carolina State, et cetera, in that opening game. It's really hard to get a buzz, particularly when you have a fan base like Georgia Tech. You know, it's not a huge program like Clemson or Georgia or Florida, et cetera. So I think it's great for the program to be able to have a football game like that, to have the fans all jacked up. It's going to be a huge football game. Now, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, Georgia Tech has played well up there the last 2 times. They didn't come away with a win, but if you recall, 2 years ago they went up there on a Thursday night, and they were winning late in the game. Actually, they jumped out, I believe it was either 14 or 21-0. Josh Nesbitt got hurt, and still they had a chance to win the football game late. Virginia Tech returned a kickoff late in the game, and then Georgia Tech went back down, almost got another one to win it. And then before that, in 2008, Tech had a chance to win the game. They outplayed Virginia Tech in the fourth quarter. They made a stop on third down, and the referee threw a flag on a very, very questionable personal foul call on the sideline. Tech ended up losing that game by 3. So they played good football up in Blacksburg, and I think they've got a real chance to win that football game. And if they do, you hate to put too much on one game, but I think if they win that game, they very well could win the Coastal Division. If they don't, you might only be looking at 7 or 8 wins. I think that game could potentially hinge that much for this team's football season.
All right, Jim, I've stayed out of the mix on this because, you know, I'm not buying the Georgia Tech. You and I've done so many interviews over the years, so many segments, had so many conversations. You're going to give me a straight, honest answer. Somebody that covers Georgia Tech, you know, you pretty much just did it. What's the win total for 12 regular season games next year?
Mark, I see 8 wins, but I'm going to put an asterisk on that. Last year I said 8 wins. It ended up being 8 wins, and to tell you the truth, I was very confident that my prediction was going to be right. This year I'm not as confident because I look at the schedule and I see a lot of games this year that could go either way. They've got Virginia and Miami at home. They could lose both of those.
Miami's had their number the last 3 years. I mean, to be honest with you, it's been 3 straight years of beatdowns to Miami.
Yeah, they have. And they've got BYU at home. BYU was 10-3 last year. I'm very confident in saying that Georgia's going to beat them just because Georgia always beats them. You got Clemson on the road. Georgia Tech has handled Clemson 8 out of the last 10 times, but including last year. But I remember 2 years ago when Georgia Tech went up to Clemson, and I didn't think Georgia Tech was competitive between the tackles. I thought that Clemson pretty much dominated that football game. What's going to happen up there? That's going to be a real tough game for Georgia Tech to go up and play. Virginia Tech on the road. And then you've got North Carolina on the road. That's another real iffy game. This is the even season for Georgia Tech, and typically the schedule is about 1.5 games tougher in the even seasons as it is in the odd seasons. But again, I see 11 football games that they have a chance of that they could win, and how many of those are they going to win? I'm just looking at it, Mark, and saying 8.
All right, yeah, and that's why I appreciate you're on it. That's why, like I said, I've got them pegged for 8 wins and 3rd in the division.
Well, you and I don't agree often, particularly on the Clemson-Georgia Tech game. So going into this season, if anybody's looking to make an investment, they may want to jump on it because you and I thinking the same thing. That's pretty stout, my man.
All right, good deal. I feel validated. That's why I just kind of stayed out of the mix because I knew you were going to give me an honest assessment as somebody that covers that program.
All right, Jim, let everybody know where they can get all your Georgia Tech coverage.
Guys, go up to gtsportstalk.com. We cover recruiting. We cover the team real close. We've got a very active fan forum with a bunch of guys that are avid Georgia Tech fans. You can jump in, and if you're a Clemson fan, please stop by. We love you guys, and we look forward to playing you again this year.
All right, Jim, thank you as always, man. We really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Have a great day.
You too. That is Jim Hart, who covers Georgia Tech for gtsportstalk.com as well as works for Georgia Sports Talk. So the guy is on all of it, a busy, busy man. We appreciate him taking the time out of his day to join us.